Students, now let us look at the systematic equipment selection procedure. There is a systematic procedure for selecting an equipment. Let me give you the basic concept and an example for it. The procedure considers critical, subjective, and objective factors. So we have three categories of factors with us, on the basis of which we will systematically select the equipment. So these factors are critical factors, subjective factors, and the objective factors. We will define different steps for these type of factors and then systematically select the equipment. First of all, we need to define critical factors and identify potential equipment candidates. Critical factors are attributes of the equipment that are absolutely essential to meet the material handling requirements. What does it mean? These factors, without these factors, you cannot determine the type of equipment. ये बहुत important factors हैं. ये वो factors हैं जिनकी बेस पर आप equipment selection basically primarily कर सकते हैं. An equipment that does not meet the critical factors will not be considered as potential candidates. Primarily, जो screening procedure है, उसमें step 1 would be the one in which you have to screen out all those factors which are not capable of attaining those attributes. A value of 1 for a critical factor that the equipment meets the critical factor requirement. There is a critical factor measure, CFM, that is the product of critical factor rating for each equipment. So CFM आपके पास एक मौजूद है, CFM critical factor measure, and it actually is the product of critical factor rating for each equipment. Critical factor ratings given होंगी, उनकी बेसिस पर क्रिटिकल फैक्टर measure फाइंड किया जाएगा. An equipment that has a CFM value of 0 will be excluded for further analysis. That means that the primary criteria or the critical factor measure is actually not present, or that attribute is not present in that type of equipment, and you will not use it for further analysis. In step 2, we will determine the objective factors and compute objective factors measure, OFM. So all objective factors must be expressed in terms of the same units. The objective factors cost, OFC or COF, is the sum of all costs for an equipment. तो OFC factor आपके पास objective cost factor क्या होगा? It would be the sum of all the costs for an equipment. A would be the sum of COF inverse for all equipments. What does it mean? A एक ऐसा measure है जिसमें आप अपनी cost का inverse ले लेंगे for all type of equipments. And then we will find the OFM, that is the objective factor measure. MOF भी कह सकते हैं आप उसे, is given by the reciprocal of COF into A. तो COF आपने कैसे find किया था? COF would be found by taking the inverse of A. Then how would you find MOF? You will find MOF by taking the reciprocal of the product of COF and A. So you will multiply COF with A and then you will take the reciprocal of it. With this approach, the equipment with minimum cost corresponds to the maximum OFM value, and the relationship of OFC for each equipment compared with other equipment is preserved in OFM. So the maximum OFM is the one that will actually be giving you the minimum cost. Now students, we will look at step 3. So we have seen CFM, the critical factor measure for the critical factors. We have seen OFM, the objective factor measure for the objective factors. Now we will look at the subjective factors and its measure. So we need to identify the subjective factor measure and compute subjective factor weights. The following 3 steps are needed to compute the subjective factor measures. So there are 3 sub-steps. That would be step 3A, B, and C. First of all, make a pairwise comparison of the subjective factors to determine subjective factor weights. For example, if there are 3 subjective factors, for example, say ease of operation, safety and congestion, then there are 3 pairwise comparisons. So आपके पास ease of operation is one factor, safety is the other factor, and congestion is the third factor. So agar there are 3 factors, there would be 3 pairwise comparisons. If there are 4 factors, there would be 4 pairwise comparisons, and so on. What we need to do, we will have factor 1 with factor 2, then factor 1 with factor 3, and factor 2 with factor 3. So if factor 1 is preferred over factor 2, then assign 1 to factor 1 and 0 to factor 2. ये पेयर वाइज कंपैरिजंस आप कर रहे हैं, तो आपने सबसे पहले तो पेयर वाइज कंपैरिजंस बनाने हैं. So how would you make the pair wise comparisons? Pair wise comparisons would be like, in this case would be factor 1 and 2, factor 1 and 3, factor 2 and 3. इसके अलावा और कोई पेयर वाइज कंपैरिजन नहीं बनता. So if factor 1 is prefer किया, तो आपने क्या करना है? You will assign weight 1 to factor 1 and 0 to factor 2. Then the subjective factor weights SFW is computed, and the total score for the factor would be found by dividing the sum of total scores for all factors. Now, after finding the subjective factor weight, we will go to step 3B, the second step for sub-step for step 3. Make a pairwise comparison of the candidate equipment and compute the equipment weight. The second step, first of all, we have found SFW. Then we will find the equipment weight, that is EW. This is done very similarly to step 3A, but 3 times, once for each subjective factor. So for the example with equipment 2 candidate and 3 subjective factors, there will be 6 equipment weights, 2 for each factor. ये बिल्कुल सिमिलर है, पेयर वाइज कंपैरिजंस आपने करने हैं, but you have to do it 3 times, once for each subjective factor. हर subjective factor के लिए आपने जो है वो पेयर वाइज कंपैरिजन करना होगा. Then we have step 3C. We need to compute the subjective factor measure SFM by combining subjective weights, factor weights, and equipment weights, which would be shown in the table. The total SFM is calculated as the sum of the product of the SFM and equipment weight EW for each equipment. Then step 4 would be to combine the OFM and SFM based on appropriate weights to obtain the final measure. FM कैसे find होगा? OFM और SFM को combine कर दिया जाएगा. Assuming a subject factor weight of 0.4 and object factor weight of 0.6, the final measure for equipment 2 and 4 are shown. Sample calculations हैं कुछ जो मैं table में show कर देता हूँ for the example, as an example. Let's say we have different critical factors with us and different critical factors rating for equipment. For example, bidirectional movement is the first factor, critical factor. Weight capacity is the second one. Flow path, straight or flexible, is the third one. And the useful life is the fourth one. These are the critical factors. According to step 1, we have to find CFM, critical factor measure. So we have a critical factor measure of 0 for, or based on the rating, for 1, 1 for 2, 0 for 3, and 1 for 4. How come? Because if any of the critical factor is 0, For example, in critical factor rating for equipment, if you see 1, so flow path pe it's 0. So that means the critical factor measure would be 0. 2 is 1. Why? Because all of them, the critical factors have a value of 1 for that equipment type. Similarly, for equipment type 3, there is a 0 for the flow path. So that is why the critical factor measure would be 0. So that means we have to eliminate equipment type 1 and equipment type 3. So there, the pairwise comparisons or the next analysis would only be done on factor on equipment 2 and equipment 4, because these equipments have a critical factor measure of 1. Now, the second step was to find the objective factors, and of course the objective factor measure. We will find the objective factor measure only for equipment 2 and 4 because of step 1. So what we will do, we will have in objective factor, we need to find first of all the objective factor cost. So what would be included in the cost for equipment 2 and 4 would be the purchase cost, would be the operating cost, the maintenance cost, objective factor cost, and objective factor measure would be found based on that cost. कैसे होगा? You will add all the cost. So objective factor cost would be 1250 for equipment 2 and 1300 for equipment 4. How come? The purchase cost for equipment 2 is 1000 plus the operating cost 200 plus the maintenance cost 50. So you will have the total operating factor cost OFC as 1250. How would you find the OFM? So you need to take the reciprocal of the factor cost. तो जो factor cost आपने लिए है उसका inverse आपने लेना है. तो inverse would be 0.51. Similarly for 4, you will find the objective factor cost by adding all the costs, that is the purchase cost, operating cost, and the maintenance cost. And then you will find the inverse of it to find the objective factor measure OFM. So the inverse of it will give you 0.49 value. Then comes step 3. We have found the OFM. Now we have step 3. That is the subjective factor measure. So for that we need to have a comparisons. Comparisons between 1 and 2, 1 with 2, 1 with 3, and 2 with 3. Because we were just taking 3 subjective factors in this example. Just remember that. So based on their rating, the total score is 2 for factor 1. The total score is 1 for factor 2, and the total score is 0 for factor 3. And then you will find the subjective factor weight. Subjective factor weight, if you can look at the subjective factor weight, is the total score for the factor divided by the sum of the total scores for all factors. So what is that? Total score अब मेरे पास यहाँ पर इस comparison में क्या बन रहा है? Total score 3 बन रहा है. तो factor 1 का score है 2. तो 2 divided by 3, my subjective factor weight would be 0.66. For factor 2, my weight is 1 and the total weight is 2 plus 1, 3. So 1 divided by 3, it would be 0.33 or 0.34 after rounding off. ये मेरे पास बन गए. Then I have to find the equipment weights. So there were 3 subjective factors which were the ease of operation, safety, and congestion. तो ease of operation factor 1 था, उसका subjective factor weight is now 0.66. Safety was factor 2. The weight for safety is 0.34. And for congestion, it is 0. That was factor 3. So I have to convert them into equipment weights. Equipment weights, that was, you need to compute, you have to do it for 3 times more. So after that, I have the summarized weight of 0.4, 0.5 and 0.57 for equipment 2. And the overall subjective factor measure, by using the formula which we have discussed before, it would be 0.434, and for equipment 4 it would be 0.6, 0.5 and 0.3. ये comparisons के बाद आ रहा है, and there are 3 times more comparisons than the first one. ये याद रखिएगा. And the total subjective measure would come to 0.566. Now the final result would be found by adding the objective factor measure with subjective factor measure. So equipment 2 would have a total score of 0.48 and equipment 4 would have a total weight of total final measure of 0.62. So students, what would be the choice of equipment then? Of course, the equipment for which the FM is higher, that is equipment 4 in our example, would be selected by this systematic procedure for equipment selection. Thank you.